Welcome to another episode of Women Are the Medicine, the show that aims to amplify the voices of wise women that the world needs to hear. I'm your host, Naz, and I'm honestly delighted that you're here and that you're listening. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to us. Please remember, though, if you are enjoying the show, to like, subscribe and share it, because this really helps our ratings and ensures that we can reach more listeners. Quick note that this podcast deals with themes of an adult and sexual nature and may be triggering for some. Please don't let that put you off, because there is so much gold. Enjoy the show. So on for today's guest, you are in for such a treat. Naomi Gale is a vaginologist, a doula, intimacy coach, photographer, and author of, wait for it, In Your Vagina Lies the Keys to Your Happiness. Of course, we're going to be unpacking that today. She is a nervous system-led, holistic focused pelvic care specialist, and she's here to guide souls back into their bodies. She connects women back to themselves, others, and the great mother so that they can bloom into all that they are. Naomi, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh my God, you said that so perfectly. There's a lot of mouthful that for an intro. Thanks so much for having me.
It is a mouthful. And you've got lots and lots of talent, but of course, you are a vaginologist. So first, let's dive straight into the vagina. What is a vaginologist, and how on earth did you become one? What led you to this path?
I always like to say that everyone's like, where did you get that name from? And I always just go, because there was no label for what I was doing, right? And so sometimes I've had the odd quip back, like, what did you go to university for that, did you? And I'm like, look, do you know what? I don't really give a shit what you think about the name of it or what I do and how I call myself. It just gives a real good starting conversation of what I'm actually doing. So really what we're doing is we're working with the fascia within the vagina, and we're more and more aware of like the body holds on, and we're aware about, how we're really working with the body somatically. So to work with the fascia is such a gift, but to know that the fascia exists within the vagina, of course, and be able to be with what's coming up from within that space, that's essentially what I'm doing. But I'm tuning into that on so many levels. And then I'm reading what comes up for people from within that rooted space. And people just don't really fully understand it until they're in it. And then when they experience it, they're like, okay, that really is like, so many things will come up, like, I didn't know that was there, that memory, we repress memories, they can come up from within the vagina, experiences that we knew that were there, but we didn't really understand how they were impacting us still, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, we're going to go deeper, because I think for so many of us, and, women, we all have one, we all have a vagina. And yet I think we know so little about it. We're kind of disconnected from it. I think if you even suggest, especially with British culture, that you have a look in the mirror at your vulva, or you even touch yourself, it's kind of, can't do that, mock shock horror. Why is that? What have you come across as you've been working in this field?
It's really hard. Like, I didn't really understand how prude we were as a nation, as a society, until I got into this work. And I honestly I followed the needs of the women that were coming to be in my space. So I started off with womb work. That's very palatable. It's external. We can all talk about the womb. We can all talk about the uterus. As soon as I started talking about the vulva, the labia, vagina, it just changed the trajectory of my work massively. And what I didn't realize was that within this space, people will project back to you their insecurities, their shame. And that can come through, and I've experienced it in so many forms now along the way. For example, a really good example is this time last year, I was offering to photograph a group of women who dip in the sea for them, for perimenopause and menopause. And I'm really fascinated about why people use cold swimming for that reason. And in my hometown, like bearing in mind, like literally in my small town, there's a group of women and they saw that I was talking, that they basically went on my website and saw what I was doing. And I was like, I'm not doing anything with your fannies, babe. All I'm doing is just offering to photograph you for some headshots and hear about your story. And maybe it'll go into like a gallery. Maybe we'll make a book out of it. I don't know, just to inspire others to go into cold swimming. And they decided to go on a tirade, I mean, a literal tirade about my work. So they went on WhatsApp groups, they went on Facebook groups, all in my local town. People who had worked with me had seen it. Friends were messaging me, screenshotting it for me. And then they started harassing me. They were like DMing me. I had to, in the end, which I never have done before, I literally put out a form for the police and I was like, I can't deal with this shit anymore. Like, you're going to have to like help me out. And they're like, it is harassment and it is a crime, but it's not harassing enough. And I was like, cool, whatever. But when they made up email addresses to email me, I basically went back and said, now you have a crime reference number. So I was like, basically, you need to just leave me alone. But the point is that they started spieling off all their own challenges around their vaginas, right? It was like, I've been raped. I've had this experience, telling everybody about it. Why should she support? She's not a gynecologist. She's not a doctor. She's not even a counsellor. That was their big thing. Why has she not got counselling training, you know? And it was just really fascinating to witness that, even just in my own hometown, because that's what I get. I get that either in my hometown with a group of women who see swim in the same place that I do. Online, I get social media who will screen me and put red flags on my account. Or when I wrote the book, Amazon took it off because it had vagina in the title. And so I just think that we live in a society that's so hell-bent on shaming women, shaming the feminine, keeping us small, keeping us from actually accessing that space. And that has how it has been for so long that it's going to take a lot of work to undo that, like a lot of work.
Yeah. And as women, you know, we are so good at upholding the patriarchy. They've done such a fucking good job of us that we will literally, we don't have, you know, men don't need to force us into shaming ourselves. It's there. It's in our system. It's living in there. Wow. That is a really tough thing to have experienced, because I know from when you came and offered your services and did a talk at the Wellness Festival that I did a few years ago, you really hit home. Your talk was phenomenal. You were inspiring women. You inspired me. And in fact, friends went to see you and they were like, she's changed my life. That woman has changed my life. So, oh my goodness, you don't need a qualification in vaginology, right? How did you get yours? What's your experience that led you here? Because obviously, I think a lot of us, we're really good at taking people along the path and the journey that we've taken ourselves, you know, especially if you're in the service of serving others and supporting others. So what was your personal journey that led you here?
Yeah, I think the real tipping point was going through infertility challenge that was not mine. So my husband and I speak openly about it because we think it's really important. And I always mention it on any podcast I'm in, because you just never know. As women, because of the shaming, we take on the blame and we take on the challenge of fertility massively, right? It's like, if we are struggling to conceive, it's our fault. It's all our fault. And I'm like, babe, it takes two to tango, right? Just so that you know, you also need sperm. And I know that might be a shock, but you do. So what I love is like when like someone's on a fertility journey and like they've like given up alcohol, taking all the vitamins, exercising, doing the things. And then the guy's like,
down the path.
Not doing any of that. Yeah, literally, right? And you're like, sorry, are your sperm all right then? Are they? They're perfect, are they? You know, and then often that causes a lot of challenge within relationships. Whereas I'm blessed that my husband, it was very much like, I just want to be a dad. Like, it doesn't matter how that comes. And, you know, when we found out he had 0 sperm, that was a massive shock in our 20s. So he had 0 sperm. It was azoospermia, which is, it can either be blocked or it can be unblocked. His, unfortunately, there was just literally nothing to unblock. So we ended up going down the route of, eventually having 3 children through donor sperm. But in order to get to that point, I went through 9 months, ironically, with the NHS telling me it was all my fault, saying like, why are you not eating enough? Your BMI is so low. I was like, babe, I don't want to, are you joking? Like these doctors being like, your BMI is so low. It's like, well, first of all, this is my makeup. I'm a really fit woman. Like I just have a low BMI. That's been my whole thing. It started triggering me. It started triggering my body dysmorphia that I'd had for years. And I'd started moving through in my 20s. Started really spiraling me. And the whole constant time was just projection. It was all your fault. You'd miscarry if you had the chance at IVF or IUI because your BMI is too low. This hormone level is not perfect. That's not good enough. You can't go through IVF. You can't go through IUI. And it was just this constant argument of like no support on the NHS. So I went to a Greek clinic in Athens, and I rang her and she was like, darling, you just need some sperm. I was like, babe, that's what I've been saying for how long, right? Just need some sperm. So I went over and I said to Ali, I'm going to go over. I'm ovulating next week. I'll just nip over. He's like, well, I can't get time off work, like going into like panic mode. I was like, I don't need you to come. It's all right. I just go over. What I experienced as a result of going there actually by myself was this group of women who came together, who supported me and held me, who had been going to Athens and going to that clinic for years, right? Some of them years, and spent hundreds of thousands, actually, quite literally. And they were there like holding me, showing me the sights and lights of Athens, showing me what a gyros was, joking about, because they were having IVF. They've never had IUI. They were like, oh, is it a penis through the wall? Like, how does it work? It's all the fit guys near me in the cafe down the end of the road. They're the donor sperm guys. I'm like, all right, a fit Greek guy, all right. So like constantly just this whole like vibe. And then the clinic themselves, the woman that owns it, and this is where I sit and this is where I stand. She's not a doctor. She's not a trained doctor. She runs this clinic and she believes women deserve the chance at having a family. And she always is this like pretense of like beautiful babies. And she does so well for women. I've sent so many women there and they've had a beautiful experience. Why? Because they're being held in a holistic manner. And that sat in my heart for a very, very long time, that feeling of sensation. When I went back, same thing. And then at the end of all of that journey, you think, oh, well, I'm feeling really empowered and really good. But then I had painful periods. They all came back. Everything was still a challenge. So then when I went to the doctor, I always remember, and I write about it in my book, he had sandals on at the time. And I just really remember he took his feet out and put his foot on the desk with a hairy toe. And I was like, your toes are so hairy. Why are you putting your feet on your desk? And he was like, women like you just need a hysterectomy. Basically, like, you're done having children, just have a hysterectomy. And I remember walking out being like, no, fuck off. This can't be what women have to put up with. Like, no. I can't. I just, no.
Oh my God. You know what? This is really reminding my dad, who's passed away, was an IVF gynecologist. He was one of the very first.
No way.
And I always remember that when patients would come and see him in his clinic in Dubai, he would say to them, he would reassure them and say, look, we're going to get you pregnant. But the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to go and take a holiday, because all of this stress and all of this worry about trying to get pregnant, he says, it's not helping your body. So he's like really like calm, reassuring, like, we'll get you there. We'll get you there. And it was back in the days of IVF when, the like 8 of the eggs would be fertilized and someone would have, tons of babies and quintuplets and, sextuplets here, there and everywhere. But they were, delighted to be pregnant. But I always remember that. And it was like, it was treating, even back then, he was sort of treating people as human beings that kind of needed, and he understood that the most important thing is to not be stressed. Like, he really understood how the body holds a baby. And it's exactly what you're saying. When you're held and you feel safe, you can go through things that perhaps feel a little bit more challenging. And women are really good at holding one another. We've lost the art, right? We've lost the art, but it's still there. It's in our bones.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh my goodness. So what was the bridge that took you from this was my journey to doing the work that you're doing now? It's quite a leap.
Yeah, it is quite a leap, because I was a primary teacher, which I always love sharing. So I was like, just yeah, as my husband always goes, he goes, what happened to that innocent quintessential primary school teacher? But I started, when I started going through this journey, I shared it on social media because I was like, no one's sharing and talking about this as openly as they should be. And they are a bit more now, definitely, but I still think there's some way to go. I had a small business at the time, so I already had like a community around me. And then when I started sharing it, women were reaching out asking for support. And I always think we have to follow that. Like if you're somebody who is like, yeah, getting DMs where women are just like really looking towards you for support, and you have that capacity to hold them in whatever that looks like, then I think that we can follow that. And so I just began doing little bits of training, really. Like I wanted to understand our cycles better. So I did fertility awareness method, the symptothermal method. I went through that. And then that's sort of like, it's always, it's like, you know what I mean? And you start dipping your toe in like the spiritual world, and then you start doing all these courses. And I went through all these trainings and, you know, loads, circular breath work, went to Costa Rica, and then realized what a poor space holder she was. So then trained again with someone, and like just like totally like this whole wild ass journey of like really learning about what I need for safety for myself, but what I need to learn for the women that were coming to see me. And then eventually I trained with Tammy Lynn Kent, who does, she's a osteopath, and I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she wrote Wild Feminine, and she's just a really beautiful woman in Oregon in America. And she came over to London just after lockdown, and that was where I was like, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to see if anyone wants to come for me to practice like doing this work. And I didn't really realize like what kind of worms I'd kind of opened really by stepping into that space. And then at the same time I was doing my Kundalini Tantra training, and she was like, you know, you should go on TikTok. And I was like, I don't know, babe, like it's another platform. So I did go on TikTok, and then I was on there for 10 days, and I was telling everyone that the key to their happiness lies in their vagina. I actually said success, but happiness sounds better for a book. And then I went viral, like not a little bit viral, really, really viral. And it was actually quite overwhelming. So my video is now probably sitting at, I don't know, 2-3 million views. But what happened was that it had been duetted with. It just kept getting duetted with, and people were finding keys, even, you know, all genders, in their vaginas, finding the keys. And they were like doing this constant duet going, oh, here they are. I wondered where they'd been, you know. And it was just like, it did hit the redneck area of America. I don't know what the politically correct word of saying that is, but there were very scary men finding keys in their vaginas. And I just ended up on this very long-winded way of like TikTok putting a red flag on my account. And then it spilled off TikTok onto Instagram. And you know when it's a real viral thing because if it's on Instagram, and people were going, Naomi, did you see this person shout? Did you this person? And some of their videos were then hitting like bloody like 16 million people. Do you know what I mean? Like insanity.
Wow.
So it just kind of then really hammered home that the vagina is the key now. So I was like, guys, this is it. That's a big
sign. That's a big fucking sign.
So yeah, that's how it happened really, that I then just really, focused on that, if that makes sense.
It does. Let's unpack that, because I know you've written a book and I want people to go out and read the book. But in your vagina lies the keys to your happiness. What are we talking about here? What is in there? What do you wish women knew?
I wish women knew that space, first and foremost, gives so much feedback. So it could be anything from like your pelvic floor, for example. People normalize a little bit of wee coming out. They're like, just a little bit of wee comes out, doesn't really matter. Or I can't jump on the trampoline, or I can't dance with my children like I would like to, or I can't go for a run as much as I'd like to anymore because a little bit of wee comes out. Not normalizing things like discharge, for example, wearing panty liners the whole time because you don't want to feel wet, and not understanding what that means. It could be vaginismus. I work a lot with vaginismus. So people who haven't heard of that, a lot of people haven't heard of that. Even people doing smear tests, I've learned, have not heard of that. And it's a medicalized word. So vaginismus is the tightening of the vagina. So basically it's, in so many terms, it's a protective mechanism from the vagina to prevent access, to prevent further trauma basically. And often is a result of saying yes when we wish we'd said no, could be even as extreme as rape, sexual assault. A lot of people who have vaginismus sometimes can't actually work out where it stems from without going into the vagina and that being tended to. And basically showing them how to soften that space. So that can give so much. People give birth, obviously, not always out of the vagina, but that can sometimes cause a lot if it was a C-section and you wished you'd had a baby out of the vagina. If you've had a baby out of the vagina and you were coach pushed, for example, by the midwife or a midwife that was very aggressive towards you at the time, this will all be remembered within the vagina. Your own birth, your birth blueprint, how you came into this world, that will be remembered within the vagina. So on and so forth. So it's just this constant feedback of where we're at. It's our root. I always say it's like our rooted space, like the plants have the roots. We're also good at like house plants now, aren't we? Do you know what I mean? Like house plants are the new pets, they say. And everyone's like looking after their monstera, like lovingly in the corner, and not giving a shit about their fannies. And I'm like, guys, your monstera's great. What about your vagina? You know, like what happened? You also have a root. So yeah.
I love it. My sister-in-law lovingly calls her vagina her petunia. So I'm like, look after your petunia. So where do we start looking after our vagina? Where can we start? Like, let's say right from the beginning, like I haven't been down there. I don't know what it looks like. You know, I let other people touch it. I let my husband touch it, but you know, or your wife, but I don't go down there. Where do we start building that connection and how?
Yeah, really good question. And really, this is a reclamation of self, isn't it? Right. And this is like putting pieces back together, coming back to who you are, the essence of who you are. So for some people, there can be a lot of shame and a lot of challenge within that space. For some people, for example, they may have never reached orgasm. That can be a real challenge. I remember at your festival, a few people had actually come up to me about that and felt a lot of shame about that. And so there can be a lot of held emotion by even just contemplating that. And a lot of people recoil in the idea of even being near that space. So I always say to people, do you know what the best thing? And this just seems so basic bitch. And I'm all about the basic bitch parts of this, right? I'm like, nervous system needs basic. We need to strip it back. We don't need anything complicated. We don't need to go far to start, you know, building this relationship. And we don't certainly need to be parting our legs and staring at the mirror in the first instance and being like, this is how I will form a relationship. We will be best friends by the time I finish with this mirror, you know, like, no, like there's so much. And I've seen people, practitioners who talk about that. And I'm like, what are you on about? Like some people just can't even bear the idea of thinking about it, let alone doing that. So just bringing in breath to that space and working out how you can soften that space through your breath can be a really beautiful gift in itself. And even if that doesn't happen in its first instance, just knowing that you have formed some level of internal connection with that space by bringing in breath to that space, just breathing into the body, breathing into the womb, breathing into the hara, the center. And even if a womb does not exist there anymore, it still has the energy of that space. So you're breathing into that space and then seeing if you can take that breath just further down and feel it softening at vulva, at labia, maybe even like rocking a little bit and noticing the perineum like on the floor or where on a mat, and then starting to visualize that space a little bit, visualize what it might feel like, the edges of it. You can visualize it. I always think about visualizing it as a beautiful rose, like the petals of that rose, if you want to go that far with it. But essentially, we need to just start to bring in some level of awareness that space exists, first and foremost, because often it's like, so basically I have a head, shoulders, belly button, something there, legs. You know, it's like, we don't talk about that. So just to breathe in there. Yeah.
And I just, as you were walking us through that, I was just breathing and drawing attention to, and it's amazing how quickly the energy just starts to build and you feel quite different. And it's something that I was taught around, you know, getting yourself activated before sex. Because often, you know, women in their mid-40s and upwards, we think our libido is just like, it's vanished. But I'm sure part of it is because we're not giving attention. And the minute you start breathing into your genitals and like into the vulva, and just by breathing, you can already start to feel like things going, oh, hello, I'm alive. I am still here. I'm alive. Do you have a daily practice for connecting, or do you have a regular practice? What do you do?
Yeah, I will send down a grounding cord into Mother Earth all the time. So I imagine like some kind of light, sometimes it's a root, and I send it down from my womb space, like it starts there. And then I always do this practice with clients on a one-to-one. And we talk about it. We talk about what that root is. It's so fascinating what people come to in their mind with the root. But basically I send that down through the vagina. So through the cervix, through the vagina, out through the labia, into the earth below, and it roots me in. And the reason I do that for so many reasons. First of all, to bring that connection back. So when I started doing this work with Tammy, I did wee myself quite a lot. Like I would, like a little bit of wee would come out. I mean, I shut myself once in the Brighton shops. I was like, babe, it's too late. It's too late, babe. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry about it. But I had an awful birth. I had two awful birth experiences. My pelvic floor. People are always like, oh, it's always birth or old age. I'm like, no, babe. I still pissed myself in my 20s. I didn't even have children. In my early 20s. It's actually because of previous trauma from other reasons, right? So for me, it's really important for me to just be checking in. I always talk about our pelvic floor and checking in with that space as a baseline for where we're at emotionally. And a lot of people say, oh, I hate the fact that I wee myself a bit. And I'm like, it's just a reminder to tend to yourself. So if your pelvic floor starts to feel great and then suddenly it's not great, that's just a sign that you need to come back and tend to yourself and mother yourself again. And so it's a reminder when I send down that cord that, first of all, don't forget to tend to that space, to tend to you, mother you, but also because I didn't receive the mothering that I needed growing up, it's a reminder that I'm held by the great mother. So it kind of like supports in so many ways, right? Like a lot of women didn't receive the mothering that they need, or they're not receiving the mothering that they need now, or they've lost mothers, then they're mothers. And so to remind you that you're held by the great mother and that she's there and she's that anchor for you through your rooted space is such a beautiful gift. So that's a daily practice that I do for myself.
Amazing. And you mentioned birth trauma there. You've also mentioned sexual trauma in this, but then I was surprised to hear that you can still have issues even if you haven't had children and you haven't had any sexual trauma. And what percentage of women do you think need to do this work?
All women. And I say that and everyone's like, there she goes. But I mean, every bloody woman, every woman. It doesn't matter whether you've had children. It doesn't matter whether you've not had trauma. It's a tending of that space. Here's what I think, right? Naz, right. 10 years' time, people are going to be going for a fanny massage over and above, going just for acupuncture, massages in general, right? I don't understand why we can't find, and bearing in mind there are some very loosey-goosey practitioners out there that I would be very wary of. And I've had a lot of women who have been to people who I'm very questionable of. But if you find people who have been through training like with Tammy, and there's plenty of them, who are grounded in ethics and really understand how to work with the fascia, and we're not working with the sexual part of this, everybody should be working with that. I cannot tell you how important it is to tend to the fascia within the vagina, which is directly connected to the jaw, directly connected to the face. Like I went and had a mouth massage.
Yeah, where they go in.
One?
Yeah.
That is the same sensation of going in the vagina, exactly the same. And it's all connected. It's the same connection points. Because at the end of the day, we are connected to that space, to the clitoris, through the pudendal nerve, right? To the main nerve. So actually what we're doing is through the vagus nerve. So what we're doing is we're actually all linked in to that space, but we'll go for, like you, I've had a mouth massage. Yeah. We've had all those. We have acupuncture. I mean, all of this was a little bit woo, only a few years ago. So I just hope that eventually women will start to see the importance of this before they come to me with excruciating pain. They don't know what to do anymore. Often what I find is, what happens is that we downplay, because women have quite a high pain threshold. Let's be honest, if it was a bloke, they wouldn't put up with as much. So basically, if we're putting up with just tiny little things that don't really feel that noticeable, we'll just downplay it, and then when it builds and builds and builds and builds, and it doesn't have to be physical, it can be emotional as well, I see, then we'll go to the doctors, we'll go through the gynae routes. The gynae route, it's such a long wait list now. I often find that people go through that and then go, well, there's no other option but to hope that Naomi in the cabin in the bottom of her garden will help me out. It's almost like becomes a joke. It's like, you, maybe?
Yeah.
Fuck, I don't know. Yeah.
I'm willing to try anything.
Yeah.
Let's help the listeners here. Let's talk about some of those small little niggly things that perhaps they're just brushing aside and not really paying attention to. But what are some of the little red flags that you think actually maybe you start looking at this now?
Yeah. So this is from my perspective, because look, you could go and do all sorts, right? You go and have hypnotherapy, you can have counselling, you can have all the things. But I work with the vagina, so I'm going to speak to some things that I think are a sign that you could just come and see what's there, see what needs to be tended to in that space. I always talk about having that space tended to, not for sexual reasons, but tended to and mothered and held, to be held through that space, is a baseline for what it looks like to receive. And as women, we don't fully often understand what it means to receive. And also, we don't feel worthy of receiving often. So that's my baseline. That's what I like to talk about. So some of the little things could be that you often talk about your birth that you had with a baby. So you love to tell the story, not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously. If you check back, you probably are somebody who will tell your story. You will tell your story to friends, coffee mornings, basically any Tom or Dick who's willing to listen about your experience. Someone who's pregnant, or someone who, they're asking you potentially, sometimes they're not. And I often find that if that's the case, that's a sign that you probably haven't worked through the birth that you've had. And it doesn't have to be a birth that was really traumatic. It could have been the perfect birth. I've had people who've had the birth, as in the perfect birth for them. I've had people who've had the perfect birth for them. It was everything that they wanted it to be, everything, but they still felt that they needed to be worked through that aspect of it, right? So I think a lot of people think that if their birth wasn't as traumatic as Jane's down the road, that they're not worthy of that being spoken to. And I think that's a red flag, for example. It could be that when you're having a wee and you think you finished, you always have to wait for a little bit more to come out. That could be another sign. Or that just basically a little bit of wee comes out every now and then, that you can't fully bounce on the trampoline with your children or whatever else, laughing, sneezing, coughing, a little bit of wee comes out. It could be that you don't really feel fully safe within the body. Like you feel like the edges of your body don't feel safe. You don't feel safe within your skin. You disassociate quite a lot. And you'll go into that kind of like freeze response quite a lot. You're in that dorsal mode. I think that's a huge red flag that you're not feeling safe at the rooted space. Something else could be that you're struggling with desire with your partner. And you're struggling to navigate that with your partner on a, it could be not just necessarily through sex, right? Because everybody goes through seasons, I believe, with their partners when it comes to sex, right? I do that with my own husband, and it depends where we're at. For some people, emotionally, you might use sex as a way of releasing and moving shit through, right? You're like, sex and going through that just really allows me to just come back to myself. And for some people, sex is the last thing they want to think about. So what I'm really speaking to is how you are receiving from your relationship with your partner, and how held you feel by your partner, right? Because sometimes they can't see fully how to support and hold you, but that's partly because you don't truly understand how to receive yourself. So if you can't see that, then that means it's a sign that you need to come back and tend to your rooted space and tend to what it looks like at a base level receive, so that you can then empower yourself to then be able to communicate that fully. Let's think. And then another, like other red flags of painful sex. if you're or in painful insertion, or like, you know, you are someone that used tampons. I'm not a massive tampon advocate, but if you're a cup or a tampon gal and you're struggling to even just insert, that's a really big red flag there. And what we want to do is we don't want to, or painful periods, because a lot of people will go, oh, I'll tend to my womb. But I will say that a lot of people that do this work will tend to your womb as well as tend to the vagina. And I would say that to be able to work with your vagina is part and parcel of the painful periods, because you want to really be able to know that your periods are literally, you're clearing and you're cleansing and you're moving and you're not got any stagnant energy in that space. So you really want that to be able to be part of that. So like endometriosis, all of those kind of signs. I see endometriosis as simply an emotional, I see it anyway, as an emotional like holding. It's a stagnant energy. Any stagnant energy, anything that's held there, like anything that's not moving freely, like PCOS, anything like that, I see that as like stagnant energy in that space that needs supporting at that rooted level. Does that help? Are these helpful?
Yeah, it does. And actually, I've got friends, and I hope that they're listening, who are suffering at the moment with endometriosis and are looking at the option of hysterectomy, but haven't, I think, addressed the sort of psychosomatic and sort of emotional manifestation of this disease, this kind of this condition in the body. So I'm going to be sending them your way for sure.
But I'd speak to that psychosomatic, because I haven't actually spoken to that, and why but people will say, why are you not a gynecologist? Why are you not a doctor? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, because what happens is, especially with going to these places, is they're not dealing with the psychosomatic issue. So when your friends are going, well, let's just have the womb out, they're being told that that's the only option left. And I think that that's so wrong on so many levels, because the whole point is that it stems from an emotional source. And if we're not dealing with that, then the manifestation comes on a physical level, and sometimes to that extreme of endometriosis, you know.
Yeah.
So
no, 100%. And I think it's getting more and more commonplace now for people to understand that the body is signaling you through illness. What are you like? I have a thyroid issue and an autoimmune issue. That's, yes, part of it is genetic, but what have I not been sharing? What have I not been speaking? Womb space, we know, it's about, there's creativity. It's not just about sex and procreation, but it's about that creativity. So what is wanting to come out of you? And I do think that as we start to reconnect to our bodies in the wisdom of the body and listen, like really listen, we like you say, the keys to your happiness is in listening to that part, right? And shifting your trajectory and following the signs. It might not be TikTok and Instagram going viral, but there are signs all the time, both outside of us, and we're always looking for them outside of ourselves. But what about the ones on the inside, right? That intuition that is so strong.
Yeah, 100%. And we live in a society where like we just mask everything, right? Like we just mask everything. And also I say to people that it might not be yours. They're like, this has nothing to do with me. I'm like, it might not be yours then. It might be your mother's, it might be your grandmother's. And then often, especially Irish families is a really good example where, out of wedlock babies, that kind of thing, that an endometriosis is quite rife within that community. It's where we're having to literally, like endometriosis, that's stagnant. It's like hiding a baby, hiding a child, hiding, this shameful sex out of wedlock scenario. And that travels through the lineages, and we're not dealing with any of this shit. We're not dealing with it. And we're not dealing with things like that. We're not dealing with things like contraception, like just shutting off women's cycles from the beginning. And then I always see it's like, oh, so I was on the pill, then I was on the coil or whatever else. And there's no shame in those things, because oftentimes that's what we need. But if a woman's going, but I didn't want to go on those things, or now I don't want to be on those things, but they feel in a vicious cycle because no one's empowering them to understand how to come off that. And then at the end of it, they're ending up with like these crazy ass perimenopause and menopause symptoms.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I had Gemma McGuigan talking about that on an earlier podcast, and it was fascinating because I was someone who was on the pill, and then when I came off the pill realized how sort of crazy and loopy it had been making me. But it's so normal, even I've got friends now whose kids are turning 16, and they're like, okay, we think she's got ADHD, but actually we're gonna put her on the pill because I think it might be hormonal, we're going to stabilize her. And it's like, Oh my goodness. This is not like,
Stabilize.
I know, right? It's like, it's normal. It's like, it's absolutely normalized for us to go on the pill as young women. It's like, oh, we'll just don't deal with that now. Like, that's future you's problem. When you get to 47, or 45, you're going to look back and go, what was I fucking thinking? So I think we do need to talk about these more as women and in circles, but we're so, I don't know how you get to be the age of mid 40s like myself. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I've ever really had a connection with my vagina and my vulva. Like, I've kind of seen it as something that comes online when it's time to have sex, or when I've got my period. But actually, I'm actually grieving a little bit about all the years that I've not been listening and not been connected. I'm sorry, darling Petunia. You must have felt very lonely. I do love you.
Exactly. So many say that. You know what? There is grief in that, Naz. There is grief in that. Yeah, I'm really witnessing that.
Of course, there really is. Like, and I think that's part of why sometimes we turn a bit of a blind eye, because it's like, actually, if I wake up to this, I'm going to grieve. I'm going to realize all the things that I've missed, or but we owe it to our daughters and our daughters' daughters to kind of stop and break the pattern and reconnect to this power. It's so powerful. I think, in your vagina lies the keys to your happiness, but also your power, right? And I'm just waking up to this now, mid 40s. It's like, oh, we have so much more power now. And actually that the reproductive state, because as women, we're valued because we're reproductive. And actually, I've not had kids, so where's my value?
Right.
Once that ability to reproduce is gone, where's our value? And I'm like, oh, well, there's so much more to come. So much more to come.
Yeah. I love that. Often, a lot of women will say, well, that's nothing to do with me because I don't want children, or I've not had children. That's got nothing to do with me. And I'm like, babe, that's got everything to do with you. And I just find it really fascinating, because I'm the sort of person who'll go to I used to drop in more because I've started home educating, so I don't do the school runs now. But after school run, go for coffee with a mum. Never thought I'd be that person, but on a Friday I was like, all right, I'll make the effort. And then they're normalising. I can hear them. They normalise things. They normalise the birth stories. They normalise wetting themselves a little bit. They normalise just this feeling of disempowerment, as women, and being like, oh, that's just a problem that I have to deal with. And I'm like, so guys, you could just come and see. I know we're a bit close to we're friends, but I could just come and tend to your vagina if you want, And they're like, oh no, it's like, oh, okay.
It's hard. It's definitely, we're very prudish. We can be. And I want to talk about, like you said, it's not all about on the fertility journey, it's not all the woman's issue. And I don't think this is all the women's issue either. I mean, you sound like you've got a husband who's deeply understanding and probably taking interest in your work. What do you wish that men knew? How can we help educate our men as well?
It's so interesting, because I remember I did this book talk, and there was basically one or two guys in the audience, and he put his hand up, right, for a question, and he said, well, I've got nieces, what can I do? What can I do? And I was like, oh my God, it's so good. This is so powerful. This is so good. And I'm trying to think what I said to him at the time, but I'm really interested in men actually starting to understand how, first of all, we can use the correct anatomical language. So it's a vagina, it's a vulva, that's really part of the shame aspect of this. I mean, I'm all for Petunia, sure, but they should be aware that this is a vagina and this is a vulva. And if they have daughters, that's even more important. Right? Because it is a child protection issue. I, as a primary teacher, heard stories of girls who were saying, this sounds like some, people are like, really? And I'm like, no, this does exist. I think, it is real. An uncle who was calling it a cup, they were calling it a cupcake, going into school, playing with my cupcake, blah, blah, blah. Teachers not, as a teacher of 30 children, you're not going to notice. No. If she said, my uncle's playing with my vagina, or my vulva, you'd start to you'd listen, right? So it's a child protection issue. So language first and foremost. And I think as well, what men really need to understand is that space, coming back to almost like that kind of early days of what it was like for men to honor that space as sacred and honor that space as like a constant, it's like a constant creation of space. That is like, you know, women are birthing ideas, birthing businesses, birthing homes, birthing meal plans. You know, often we talk about the mother load, right? And it's not, don't have to be a mother to have that. It's like we are often mothering our partners. It's a constant joke in our household, right? It's like the mothering of the partner, even though they'll get really shitty sometimes about that and be like, no. And it's like, sometimes, you know, we really, you know, we do actually have to just sometimes tend to that as well, you know, like we're the ones sometimes having to make the plans, bring up the ideas, plant the seeds. And that really does stem from a rooted space, right? And so for them to honor that space as this feminine, like sacred space, and understanding that in order to have access to that space on a sexual level, then there needs to be this real beautiful honoring of what it means to be at the heart space for that woman. And I think that is often what is missed. It's like, how have you cracked her heart open? How have you understood what that means first and foremost before anything else? Because that's the woman's positive pole, is their heart space. For a man, the positive pole is the penis, right? So that's such an interesting like thing where, you know, in during sex, like a man to be rooted into that space really needs to feel anchored at their genitals, at the penis. But for a woman, she needs to feel anchored at her heart space before anything else. And I think that often men forget that. I think I've seen a lot of women who are navigating, you know, one night stands with men or relationships where they don't feel fully held. And that's partly because men are not shown the way. Like during you know, schools, sex education, they're not shown what it means to crack a woman's heart open and talk about what it means to hold a woman and make her feel safe. And how does the environment make her feel safe? How does your approach make her feel safe? How does your words of affirmation make her feel safe? We're not told that. We're told, so if you look his sperm in the eye, you'll be pregnant with a child, and this is what would happen, right? Like that's all they're shown. They're not shown anything more. So often what I see is that it's, you know, we are in this like moment of empowering the feminine, and yeah, quite rightly fucking so, but also we have to empower our partners. We have to empower men to feel that they can also be on this journey with us, because actually men are disempowered as well. And the men who really want to hold and really want to understand, they don't know where to start, because it's either this very aggy feminist approach of being like, fuck all men, they're all a bunch of arseholes. And I'm like, sure, there are many men who cannot see their wrongs. I even had a run-in with a couple of men this week around that. But at the same time, it's like, how are you empowering your person, your man in your life, to have these conversations, and also back down any misogyny that exists, even if it's your bloody dad. I want to hear all misogyny, bat it out. I want to hear that you're calling it out. I want to hear that we're empowering men and women equally. That's what I want to hear.
Yes. No, we're big fans of that approach. And I've always said that, you know, as women, we're also really good at emasculating the masculine. And when we emasculate the masculine, they objectify us as women, because it's easier to sort of defend against and attack. And then you're in this vicious cycle. And I think just coming back to what you said there about, you know, honoring the sacred, and that this is a beautiful sacred space, and for men to sort of enter it with consent, and to crack our hearts open. We as women, as using your words, we've also got to be able to receive that. We've got to be able to be worshipped, right? And my husband, love him, absolutely love him to bits. And he will openly say, you know, he worships me. He worships me. He worships my vagina. and I'm all for that. But it took a long time, you know, 22 years, 23 years in we are now. But it was really quite challenging at the beginning, because I wasn't used to that. Right? I really was cut off from that. But obviously it's changed my life. I'm a very happy woman. And he's a very happy man. But
I bloody love that, Naz. I love how 23, I'm actually celebrating that 23 years of you actively learning to receive from him in that space, and him being able to give to you exactly what you need. And that's then a reciprocal relationship, right? And yeah, you have to feel worthy of that.
100%. And this is the kind of, like, you know, people see us on the outside, and yes, we still have arguments and we're just a normal couple, but on the deep level, there is that ability for him to worship, and for me to say, yes, I am worth this. I am, you know, my wedding vows, I was like, I'm the queen in the chess piece, in the chess game, and you're the king, and the queen is more powerful and you should worship me kind of vibes. And it's true. And I wish every woman could feel that in a relationship, regardless of whether they're with a man or not. It doesn't matter to me what gender, but everyone needs to feel worshipped. And he just wants to feel like the hero. He just wants to feel like my hero and my rock. And if I'm busy doing all the things and not letting him worship and serve me, then I'm not being the queen, right? I'm being the worker bee. So little side angle there.
No, not a side angle at all. That's exactly it. And I have the same in my relationship. I'm really blessed with that as well. And I think that it is, though, not just it's been a journey, like, in order for that to happen. And I actually had my son write worthy and receive and his handwriting, and I had that tattooed on my arms last year, because I was like, I just want to remind myself that I am worthy of receiving, because we often forget it. Even we have to, it's an active practice to be able to do that. And I find it really fascinating that, you know, as a society, we've forgotten that and I think people think that this is really like gender stereotyping, and, you know, and it's like, it's also challenging, and everything's just also challenging to navigate at the moment. But it's like, men actually need to feel masculine. They actually do need to feel that. And my husband did this amazing masculine male archetype course, and in it they talked a lot about hunter-gatherer, creating safety for their partner, creating safety for the community around them, like kind of that like exertion. And I see it in my son, right? It's like, I've got twin girls and my son, and there is a difference. There is a difference. They brought up in exactly the same house in exactly the same way, in what was a very gender neutral house. And my son's like, oh, I need to run around and really like exert my energy and feel that, you know what I mean? And the girls are like, la, 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 I don't need to go out today. I can just sit and play, you know? And it's like so interesting that we're not empowering men in that masculine. And then we're not receiving that in the feminine.
It does make sense. Yeah, I think that it's confusing times right now, but there are some things that are they're just, you know, it's down to our hormones. It's down to what those are. Yeah. You know, people don't understand that our hormones dictate our behavior and our personality in many respects. So yes, fully on board with that. And let's have a look at what do you hope? What's your hope through the work that you are doing? What do you hope for humanity through this work that you are bringing to the world? Your medicine, your gifts.
Do you know, you asked me this before, and then I did write it, and now I'm like, what did I say? So I'll probably end up on some kind of like rant about it. But I think I just genuinely just hope that we normalize the conversation. Like, we normalize the conversation so that there's less shame, so that people can open up and start to feel that they're heard and that they're held within the challenges that they're navigating, rather than it's consistently downplayed as just a thing that we have to put up with, to the point where we're having something really extreme like hysterectomies, or just in this like complete loss and pit of despair of what it means to be a woman navigating this world. And I think that's my hope, really, is that we consistently start to open up the conversation, and that we can talk about the vagina and the vulva as just part of the body, rather than it just being this hugely shameful space. So that is my hope for humanity, and I hope that I can continue doing that even through the censorship of it all.
Yes, I love what you wrote. Actually, it made me laugh out loud, but in a great way. You wrote, I put, "What is your hope for humanity?" And you wrote that we all discuss the fanny more openly. To be honest, we need to get a fucking grip.
Oh yeah, that's what I wrote. Yeah.
But it's true, we're damaging ourselves, our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to our partner, our children's relationship, by not talking about this. So obviously you have your wonderful podcast, Fanny Chat, I think it's called. Yeah. So people can listen to that, our listeners can listen to that. But how else can people work with you? If this has sort of sparked something in them and maybe they're feeling like, oh yeah, I'm feeling brave enough to come and talk to you. What are some of your offerings? Where do you suggest people start?
Yeah, so I always say to people that you're so welcome to just get the book, right? Like, you don't have to have a conversation with me. You can just get a book. And sometimes that's enough for people. And sometimes that sparks wanting to support themselves with the work more. But I actually have a copy next to me, incidentally. That's the and it is on Amazon, and you can also order it from bookshops, because you can just they can order it through the ISBN number or the title.
They've let you back on Amazon. They've put it back on.
Well, it is on Amazon, but Amazon has its own algorithm, and sadly, I'm not part of that, which is really shameful. But what you have to do is go on Amazon, and if you type in the title, it will just bring up How to Make Your Partner's Vagina Tighter as a book. So don't. It's just a bit of an annoying thing. But society. But if you go onto the side thing and you click books and then type it in, then it will come up. So, or a direct link from my website, that kind of thing. And then I'm on Substack. I write on Substack. I really love writing on Substack. I think it's a really lovely, safe space to be. I am on social media, on Instagram. I try to be on there less, but I realise that people still scroll and are still on there. So even though I'm like, I'm going to be on Substack, guys, not everybody's on there. So I get that. And then to work with me, I often just say a really good starting point is to be in that space of like, yeah, I feel like it's a hell yes to start working in that space. And I work on a one-to-one, in person or online, and people fill out a form, and it's like a really in-depth form. So they get to a time just to be with me to explore their journey to this point and see if this work would really align for them, and if we would be a good fit. But I only work with people over deeper, longer spaces, basically, because I think that that's what the work needs, and that's what the nervous system needs. So,
yeah. Amazing. And we always ask this question at the end of the show, and I know it's a big question, and people always like just one thing. But if you were made Madam President of the world, let's say that position existed, and you were made Madam President of the world for one day, and you got to implement a change or a law that would stay in effect in perpetuity, what would that be?
Oh yeah, you asked that one as well. Oh, I can't remember what I wrote. Right, one law. I remember thinking it's really hard to think of one law. What did I say on my form? One law that would be in effect. I remember saying this to my husband. I was like, that's a really hard question.
It is.
Isn't it?
It is.
I would ensure and it would stay in place after. I didn't remember that part of it. It would stay in place after.
Yeah.
The law would.
Yeah. So you can implement something. I mean, I think we've had people saying all presidents and prime ministers and leaders have to take a psychedelic journey. So they have to sit with ayahuasca or psilocybin.
Amazing.
Yeah. We've had some tremendous ones. And also just some small ones, just, every child has access to education, right? Just things that still aren't in place, which is insane. Do you want me to help you out and read your answer, and you can fill us in?
No, I feel like a really good one would be that every child has the right to, you can tell me what I wrote in a minute as well. Every child has the right, and is literally a necessity to have a proper sex education lessons, which involve actually talking about the things that need to be spoken about, including proper consent conversations and things like stealthing. I don't think we're talking about that during our sex education properly. It is getting better, but it's still not there, and not every child has access to it. So
yes, and you did put that. You put every child and every adult has to take a course in consent. Yeah.
I'm always so aligned with myself. Look,
Naomi for the win. Amazing. Well, I hope that those of you who've been listening have really enjoyed this conversation and have learned something, and take this forward and get the book, especially if you have a vagina. I know my producer, Rowan, who's a man, is going to really enjoy this show. He's going to learn a lot about vaginas in this, and I'm also going to make my husband listen to it too. It's really, really important that we sort of drop the stigma, or at least try to do our part in dropping the stigma by sharing this. So, Naomi, you are such a delight to talk to. I know we had fun before we started recording. I hope that we have you back on the show again another time. But yeah, just best of luck to you. And thanks again for bringing your wisdom and your sense of humour to the show today.
Naz, it's such a pleasure. Podcasts are my fave thing. So thank you so much for having me. It's such a treat.